And well, welcome everyone. I am thrilled that you're here. My name is Luis Alejandro Tapia, and I am the network doula for Illuminate. And I'm here because I'm really interested in how change happens and how we, as human beings, can work for change and change the way in which we change things. So, welcome everyone to our webinar titled Power, Injustice, and Substance Change. I want to introduce you to someone who I really admire and who I've had the pleasure of working with pretty regularly over the past year and a half. It feels like 3 years, Ana Lucia, right? It feels like we've known each other longer because of this year. But Ana Lucia has experience in participatory design for social justice and products that are humanitarian, products for public works, indigenous societies, education applications, and sustainable design, among other things. As an anthropologist, agroecologist, and facilitator, she applies models of ecologic design and liberatory practices to catalyze collective intelligence. And so, Ana Lucia, I know that that's just a small bio. So please let us know, what is something that if we really knew you, we'd know about you? Oh, that question. Thank you. I really appreciate it, Luis. If you really knew me, you would know that I face the world and its complexity through humor, through jokes, through laughter, and that is a way that I have of navigating even, life's difficulties and absurdities. Thank you. Thank you, Ana Lucia. I didn't mention that I'm calling in from the Bronx, the Napa land. If you're able to, please let us know where you are joining us from. Please let us know in the chat. I'd like to know where you're visiting us from. And I'm participating from Bogota. La Sabana de Bogotá in Colombia. Okay, well, it sounds like the South is well represented here, from North Carolina to Colombia. Welcome, everyone. And please keep arriving. I'd like to say that we want the conversation about equity, about power, about justice to stay relevant to everywhere. At the same time, we recognize that these terms themselves have different meanings in different disciplines, in different domains and countries. So we're going to be carrying on this session in Spanish and in English, and we know that this presents limitations for people's participation because context is so important. So the first question or the first conversation that I'd like to have with you, Ana Lucia, is how do you define justice and power within your work? Let's start there. That should be easy. Oh yeah, soft. Let's start with a soft question. Well, wow. I don't even know where to begin to answer that question, but let's see. The work that I do is is work that's territory based, right? It's work that connects to place and to living systems as a primary source of inspiration and direction. And so I've come to develop this not by myself, but thanks to so many people, some of whom are on this call, in fact, um, with whom we've started to understand a little bit about how part of what it means to detonate change in the world in which we live today, and how it implies that that we need to return and reshape our connection to the living world and to the spaces in which we're in. That's why I also like this practice that I've you know recently learned of naming them and seeing them. And this land-based work, this territory-based work, these two concepts, power and justice, have many faces. And let's start maybe with maybe I'll begin with the most common one, maybe, uh, in which we've realized that oftentimes those who hold power in a place are the ones who get to make decisions about how that place is organized, what gets taken care of, what gets left behind, what gets created, what gets destroyed. But also, we've seen that this power comes from different places. And for me to offer a definition, what comes to mind right now and what I've tried to articulate in my practices in the past is that there's two ways of looking at this. One is maybe hierarchical power, in which you need, in some way, to see the structures, the broader structures that dominate processes and peoples, maybe on a smaller scale as well. And then there's another way of looking at power, which is the power that the place itself has, the territory, the land has as a living place, as a unit. And on another hand, the power that the peoples who inhabit that land have over their own lives, over their own decisions, and the power that they build collectively as well, so that in some way they can lead their own destiny. And so all of these things are present when we're looking at territory, especially when we're talking about a territory in Latin America, which is where I've been working, because you realize that there's so many different scales in which there's different power balances and networks which are interconnected, even on a national, international, local level, that you can't even understand, or that if you don't understand properly could cost you life, right? And so that's on one side. As a commentary on power and on justice, I think that in the world that we've done in Colombia and in Mexico especially, um, holding into account place, territory as an anchor, as an axis, justice brings us once again to think about what is fair for the people who live here, what is just for the people who live here and for this land. What is the vocation held by this territory? What is the calling? What is the value that it offers or that it wants to be offered? And from that place, begin to explore what is needed. And in that sense, yeah, I like to navigate a concept of justice that's more anchored in what is specific to that land, even though we're also talking about conditions that are sometimes, it seems universally applicable. However, like the expression of each of these things changes by territory, the specific actions that we take on change by territory. And that's something that we're trying to really develop in different places and practices. How do we refine what we're doing to what is needed in this place, in these conditions, within the context of this land's history, going in deeply into the ins and outs of this territory, not just like the 500 years after colonization and conquest, like, but even before those first settlers. What do the mountains tell us? What does the water tell us as it runs through the landscape? What does that call in? And then on the other hand, we also talk a lot about understanding justice as a process of redistribution, of acknowledgement, um, and that in some way re-vindicates like the presence that people have, the claim over their territory and their destinies, their lives. And then from that point of view, justice also becomes a process of let's say a dialogical process, because something else that we've encountered is that uh, oftentimes we arrive, anywhere with so many pretensions about what we think we know, about what we think works and what we think people need. And so many people, need to ask questions first. We need to ask, what is going on here? What do you see? What do the people around you see? And to have that as a starting point and to honor the auto determination of people in their own land as a step toward defining where they want to go. So in the way that you spoke about systemic change, the way that you practice it, it feels like systemic change should be, or that systemic changes should be intimate, should be personal, should be hyperlocal, cultural. And it and it has to be, how do you say it? It has to be something that people, the land also participates in. Yes. And well, let's talk about you. But I've noticed that oftentimes in this sector that we call systems change, um, there's been a lot of systems change without equity, without justice. But we're talking here about the fact, the reality that the way that we reach justice, reach equity, reach liberation is through systems change, systemic change. So there's a version that, yes, can be changed without having that in mind, but the question is if that's real change. So I'd like to know how and when did you take into account in your own practice that equity, that power analysis, that justice is key, is systemic change. And so how did you come to that? And also, how do you manage it at work these days? How do you do it?
Wow. Anyways, I see two different aspects to this question. I sort of understood the importance of power and equality in my work very early in my career as an anthropologist, working in different projects in different places here in Colombia, in the Pacific coast, in the Amazon, in the Andes, in the areas close to the Caribbean, in Santanderes, which is another region, and they all have very special qualities. Colombia is a very diverse country with an amazing diversity, regional diversity. And in all these places, and through the relationship with my colleagues, I started seeing that there that there was a clear distribution of certain conditions. Um, like that there was a very clear difference between the differences in the urban centers and the big cities that were like the most developed in the country, quote unquote, and then those that were outside of these circuits, also in quotations, these territories depend. We depend on these territories for a lot of other things. So that's when I started noticing the different relationships that existed between the rural and the urban systems, seeing the total systems that we knew about and all the systems that I started understanding by meeting the people that which was I was with whom I was doing the work. Colombia is a country full of inequities. Uh, it's, we have an amazing conflict within that has such inequality that has lasted over 50 years. Um, there is such a relationship of inequality that have been produced, let's say locally, quotations, but there's things in Colombia and maybe even in Mexico to a certain extent. It's also been as a relation with other the relationship with other countries, especially those industrialized countries in the world. So I started observing all of these things in the different places where I work and the different projects that I work, tourism projects, um, uh, collective land projects in the Pacific, food systems, seed preservation, and on my side, I started realizing that there were so many things that we needed to do as a country and as a region if we wanted to let go of these inequalities. But I found something that I should highlight in this conversation. And it's the way one of the pathways that I see for this change, the systemic changes, is to um, feed ourselves of the diversity that characterizes us, personal diversity, biological diversity. I have learned so much from the Amazonian indigenous peoples. They've been dealing with negotiations, very long negotiations with the government so that they could create a public policy of education that would respect and honor their traditions and their culture, that would allow them to adopt things that would validate a way that would guarantee their way of life, their traditions. It wouldn't be like a just a political rights conversation. It was about how they could continue to develop their identity and to and that for me was really fundamental. I mean, looking for your identity, it's not only, you know, making everything equal, and much less in a country that's as diverse as Colombia. But so the question became, how can we generate these equality characteristics while preserving the diversity of the country? And the second phase of this answer is has also to have to do with the connections that I made through my work with the land and with the live systems. So when you go from social sciences, the relationship between power, the way that we have uh, behaviors, possibilities, I could see until I could notice that I couldn't really make a disconnect with from these ways of life that are so immersed in the territories that make us who we are. And then I started realizing that also to do justice to my country, to say it like that, on my region and my, Latin America. So we also had to do justice to its lands, to its territories, and uh, finally, whatever goes through there, we can't be thinking of political systems and social systems because this, in many cases, made us forget the fundamental parts of our existence, which are the real things that lead to life. And I saw it in many different ways in Colombian left, for instance. Uh, Colombia is Latin America, and sometimes I went far from Latin America because sometimes when you're looking for that ideal of equality, you hear that it's beautiful nature and resources and views are being criticized. So for me, like to get to the practical side, the way for me to work within these two things, it meant like interconnecting, weaving the systems change to generate conditions for a dignified life for all of those that we worked with, and generate conditions for a dignified, respectful life for everyone that we work for. So, because being fair is not only being fair with ourselves as a species, because a life does not work that way. And coming from a country like Colombia, where the conflicts and the land produces social events, to me, it was more evident these situations. And we talk about how we're exploring actively our conscience and putting a lot of information and a lot of thought into what's going on. And through the work that we're doing, we would generate facts that would, agreements, would translate into changes into life conditions of everyone that's human. And I also think that we need to do justice. Um, we need to do justice to our history and our legacy as Latin people has to go through there. Healing our relationship with the land, recuperate that, regenerate the land. It's a metaphor that I like a lot from my agroecology teachers. How we have done some harvesting from our views. We've also harvested our minds, and that's a tragedy. Um, so the question right now is, how do we diversify our landscape, our thoughts, to do justice to those qualities that amplify life and make life richer, like a president in Colombia. Uh, it's very Latin in Colombia, but if it's not very Latin, it's also very mine. And this invitation is like, not, we're not only surviving, but we're also living, and we're living well, with well-being, with joy, with a complicity with what makes us feel moving. Partially because in any other way, it would become very boring. Everything would be very boring and very,
And Lucia, I love that framework of living deliciously. And I'm taking notes because I have even more questions than those I arrived with. And so let's talk about that framework. We've had some conversations about things that we Northerners, let's say, those of us who are in North America, um, and have um, yeah, have this more Western approach. And we know that there are so many things that can't be translated across languages, across cultures. But I want to know, what have you found, or what have you found that hasn't been able to be translated into a Western point of view in terms of systems change? And I want to know if that framework of living deliciously is one of those things that um, that doesn't work. Yes, yeah. Tell me. Oh, I love this question. Uh, yes, I think that deliciousness as a concept is difficult to translate because we associate it with so many things. Um, with dance, with jokes, with food. Um, and so simply, enjoying the moment. But another concept that we've seen that's difficult to translate is the concept of territory, actually. And especially territory as we've seen it in different experiences in Latin America. Um, as a bet for transformation, growth, it looks a little like regionalism or bioregion, and maybe that's more present in some Western outlooks and Northern outlooks. But this concept of territory is something that I've seen that's difficult to translate because for us, it comes with a lot of history. And it also has a connotation that goes beyond a geographical space. For instance, it goes beyond like a sense of property as well, because you can find the word territory in biological sciences, for instance, and it's very easy when you translate it to associate the concept with, I don't know, um, with like, oh, this is the area that this person or group of people are taking care of, maybe, or ferociously protecting. And we've seen that it goes beyond that. Another one of my teachers talks about the difference between those who own land and those who have territory. Oh, and I love what Marta says here, that they have the same concept of territory in Italy. And you can say the word in English, right? But the expressions that I've seen of it in social movements in Latin America, um, with indigenous peoples, with people from the countryside. It's something that I haven't seen anywhere else. And even in Mexico has like a lot of US influence. And so that's something that's like also struck me there. I enjoyed like discovering these differences that exist even amongst us. And I think that that's something that's generated limitations for us to be able to translate the practice that we want to do in Latin America and in the Caribbean since the beginnings of like 2000. There's this um, focus on territorial development, and development also has so many things that I don't agree with. But this focus on like territorial development is something that's really valuable, that has really been worked on, and that I don't see mirrored in other discourses in other places. And I think that, I mean, I could say so many other things, but maybe for this space and our this conversation, I can just mention those two things, yeah, that deliciousness, but also, the concept of, like, dignity or dignified life, that's been something that's been really hard for me to translate. I don't know why. I don't understand, well, like, just what is lost in that exercise. I also don't see it so much in, like, Western or Northerner, um, discourses the way that I see it in so many movements and discourses and public policies, like, here in Latin America. This concept of dignified life, which looks a little like, like movements for dignified life look a lot like social justice movements that maybe exist elsewhere, but they place the emphasis on different things. And um, I've had mentors whose mother language is English. And when it comes time to explain to them this idea of a dignified life and living with dignity, I don't always feel like we're talking about the same thing. We can use similar words and synonyms interchangeably, and it's not the same conversation. And I also like this difference because justly, like, dignified life puts an emphasis on what you want to build. And so the conversation turns around a lot about, what is dignified life? What is living deliciously? Instead of focusing on how do we make justice? How do we guarantee social justice? I think that both conversations are necessary. And I think, that's why I like having spaces like this one in which people from all over can ask themselves these questions because I think that we need a little bit of everyone's thinking. Again, like celebrating this diversity that characterizes us. Not just thinking of myself as a Colombian and as a Latin American, but like in planetary terms. If we're going to globalize, then let's do it deliciously. Let's bring the sancocho and the ajiaco. A big soup with everything. I love food. Like you say, this nourishes me. Yes, exactly. I think those are three things that I would mention um, right now, like that I would put a spotlight on. Well, I want to take this moment to see who is here with us. So I want to ask everyone to go to the chat and tell us what are the systems that you are trying to change right now. This is a question for audience participation. What are the systems that you are actively working to change right now? Thank you, Barb. And so while we wait for responses to come in from the crowd, with that you were sharing with us about what what can't be translated or what you haven't seen as translated in a way that is real. My question is, what do you feel? Okay, let's say a dignified life. What do you think is lost, when we can't translate a dignified life? Or where we can't live deliciously. And I'm saying this, within the context that we know that there's so much that we can learn from the global south. And so I want to know, like, what do you think is in play? What do you think is at risk when we can't translate these things? Wow. I love all of your questions, Lou. They're wonderful. I think that, well, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask me that is, what's at play, what's at risk is precisely like these other ways of seeing, these other ways of seeing life in general. Um, and I'm also really interested if other people have examples of concepts that they find hard to translate, just so that we can enrich our collective imagination. But in particular, to me, what's at risk is this way of looking at life. Our mental models associated with these things, the ways that we think, come anchored to ways of being. They come, through generations from people who have experienced, like lived, felt from those positions, from deliciousness, from dignity, from territory. And so what we're risking is, acting once again from this mono crop, from not being able to accomplish the changes that we want to see, because, it's going to be like whatever some Scandinavian social democratic country came up with, and then their vision of well-being is the only one that gets put forth, right? Like all of these ideas, how do we move through more desirable ways of being and of living on earth and relating to each other? And I think that summarizes a lot of other things that are also at risk, right? Because once again, like, if it's just about building from the point of diversity, and in some way or another you're not able to connect to the model of the world that you have in order to build from that place, then you're also risking a lot of relationship or dreams, people's dreams. And I think that's the hardest part. On the other hand, like, it also has consequences in terms of, like, continuing to reproduce these patterns in which we as Latinas are, like, always looking to the outside to find answers for, like, what we would like to do and how we would like to do it. In some way, we're also risking, the idea of auto determination and auto exploration and discovery, discovery as a region, as a tribe, as a country, as a people, however you want to divide it. And none of that strikes me as desirable. Something that's also at risk, and going to be the last thing I say, is that when you can't translate that deliciousness, then there's not as much play. You don't have as much fun, right? So that joy, when you're not sharing, it's not the same. And I think that's something that's really necessary when it comes to systems change. We need to be able to enjoy it. And we need to have in some way, like, a shared sense of what flavor and joy and delight are, even if we like the same things, right? Or don't like the same things. We all need to be in the space of, yeah, of sharing and co-creating, maybe in a less formal way, maybe in a less structured, hierarchical way, in a way that's a lot more free, a lot more improvised, a lot more danced. All of these ways, and styles that each person brings to the conversation, to the process. Well, Ana Lucia, you know how much I love food. And immediately I had that image of a sancocho, and it's a big stew. Um, and I also like the importance of joy and fun in that work, of deliciousness in that work, of pleasure. I think that there's something there, that can't be translated in terms of the pleasure of doing things, and also of doing things that give you pleasure. It doesn't always have to be hard or aggressive. But again, yeah, let's have a little fun. I want to open it up, pass the mic to the chat to see who else can offer some ingredients to our sancocho, to our stew. And so I'd like to know what questions, what resonance, what thoughts you'd like to share with us. And you can use the chat. You can also raise your hand. And here we go. So I just want to give you all a moment to see what questions, echoes, thoughts you're experiencing. And please, when you speak, share your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, Ana Lucia. Hi, Luis. So I'm going to try to speak in Spanish. A question that I have is how uh, the spiritual element is part of this, because sometimes in places where I come in Italy, we understand uh, well, but sometimes it's really hard to introduce that spiritual concept amongst ourselves when we're talking about social change or systemic change. Thank you. Thank you, Martha. That's a great question. And I think it depends a lot on where you're working and with who. And an experience that I can share ha- and it could be intuitive, but it has to do with parties and celebrations, because a celebration well made helps you connect with things that are more, like beyond you. And it also allows you to connect with other people whom you're sharing with and who you're creating something with. Something that I have seen, if you think about spiritual, for instance, this practice that helps us uh, connect with something that's bigger than ourselves. For me, a basic way of doing that is by generating these connections with things that are less formal, less solemn, less formed, more loose, more free, that allow us to be fully present, sharing with others. Okay. And that's why I put this example of celebration, because precisely you're there when you're celebrating, you're there, you're having a good time, and you're enjoying yourself, you're there, you're present. No? So there's a lot of ways to design celebrations with deliciousness. And it's something that we also tend to do with parties, is, using substances that change your conscience, alcohol, drugs. It doesn't have to be that way. We can celebrate and get together and share from a different place of connection and presence. And I also think that it's really valuable to offer spaces just to be, just to be, to notice and recognize presence. And this can be through many different ways, but the one that I most enjoy and I feel that has the most potential in our Latin cultures is through dialogues and processes that are common in their history. Another way to be totally there is storytelling. But again, to me, when you say is asking who is uh, in the room, who is there, and are these people? How do they connect within themselves? How do they interconnect to each other? Maybe somebody has more to offer, and that's why I was asking, to generate these spaces of connection where you can be there. So, in general, anything that helps to enter in a place of true joy is a place It's a good door. It's a good entryway, something that you can open for spirituality, transformation, and change. Again, because another thing I've seen is that when you're not present, pessimism wins a lot, a whole lot. When you connect there with pain and anguish and lack of hope, hopelessness, anything can open. Anything can open. You can open a participation in any way. So I think that joy and gratitude help us know that there is something else in the world, that something beautiful can be created and we can bring it to that space. And in some way, this could be connected with justice in the way that you return or nourish, better said, the capacity that we all have to dream again, to dream that we can, to dream that we can do it, to dream that our land can be beautiful and bountiful and green and all of that is what creates that deliciousness, that joy. And again, it's a perspective, and it's a question that I ask myself all the time when I'm working with different types of people. It's not very easy to generate it. And something that I've always liked to do is like see how I can push a little bit, push the limits. How far can I stretch the limits so that uh, so even though there's some discomfort, not to feel uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. Um, it enough uh, to plant and go, wow, I can create, and people can say, wow, I didn't know I could do that, and I didn't know I was gonna like it. And I think we really need a little bit more of that. So we can do these things, and we can start again. So it's like that flavor of things, it's like being in the kitchen making a soup, and let's put a little bit of this in and a little bit of that, make it, play with it. I think, yes, I personally think that I need it. I don't know if other people do too.
I want to just leave another moment to see if there's another question that comes up in the chat. Let's see. Ana Lucia, I have learned so much. I always learn so much. Um, and I don't know why I always feel hungry when I talk to you. You spoke about work that is located in deep roots. You talked about being, comfortable with discomfort, dreaming, eating, dancing, spirituality, and doing it before or in front of catastrophe, right? The catastrophe of systems that are killing the earth, are killing people, are killing the world, killing imagination, as you mentioned before. So I want to know, like, what are the practices that connect you to those roots? And maybe there's a few that we can also, share with you or can practice with you in the work that we do. Well, one practice that really connects me and that I think that anyone can do at in any place is the practice of storytelling. of telling our stories and opening space within these processes that we design and that we accompany so that people can share their stories. And learning to listen from a place that's really attentive and genuine, and also learning to listen from a place of relationship, right? Like there's so many practices where they say like listen without reflecting, or listen without gesturing, listen as if you were a blank wall. And sometimes that works, but I'm not talking about that type of listening. I'm talking about the type of listening in which you're actively connecting to the other and finding yourself in their story from whatever way that happens, in whatever way that happens. And I think it also always generates opportunities of growth to share your stories, and the stories that to you are authentic and that call you to be in any particular space. So on on the one hand, I think that's a practice that we can do. We can do it collectively, and we can also do it individually. Those of us who like to write, we can write down our thoughts, we can write what happened, we can unload like some intense emotion, and that really works. And then on the other hand, another practice that has particularly served me in my experience has to do with walking the territory. It has to do with going out on a walk, which is not the same thing as driving to a specific spot and then like picking up something to eat. And no, no, no. Walking through the place that is receiving you, paying attention. Paying attention to what it smells like, what you're seeing, what's beautiful, what exists. Paying attention to how the wind is blowing, how the water flows. Just coming back to the territory that you want to impact, that you want to accompany, that you want to see grow and flourish, and really walking it, as much as you can. And this is difficult wherever you want to do it, but you have to do it. You always have to do it. You have to um, return to this vehicle that is our body and walk through the world knowing what it feels like to be a human body in this space. And what do you see? What do you encounter? What do you feel as well? Because everything that you feel is true in some way. It connects you to your roots and helps you realize, well, how this is different from what somebody else might be experiencing. But it's something that we do often in our work, is being there, being in the place. Right now, we're working in Xochimilco, which is a region of Mexico, and part of walking through Xochimilco includes rowing. It means rowing in a small canoe through the channels for half an hour, for an hour, until you get from point A to point B. So do that. Be there with the people. If you're in a place where they make incredible arepas, make the arepas. Be a part of the experience, the life experience of someone who inhabits that space in that time, and connect from place of action, from experience itself, and not just from what you see on the news or you read or what your interviewer said. Put your hands in the earth. Ask a farmer to teach you how to grow potatoes. See how it goes. Truly connect with the actual experience of people before you ask anything of them. Because often we're very ambitious with our aspirations for other people's change, for other systems changes, other landscapes, other families, but we don't stop to think about how hard it is for us as individuals to try something, to change, to do something in a different way. And so another thing that really connects me that you'll know because of all my examples and what Luis mentioned is food. Um, Food speaks a lot about roots. It speaks a lot about things and history, the history of things. Because right now, in the world in which we live, no dish is original 100%, right? Uh, you have people in Peru who are cooking with garlic that came from Europe 400 years ago, and their soups are delicious. And everything that you can eat anywhere really tells a story. And food has so much potential to generate these connections to what is rooted, to what cannot be seen, which I think is also like this metaphor of the root. And that's why it works. And then my other recommendation, which is also tricky because you're exposing yourself to so many things, is eat what's there. If you're in a new place, if you're in a place with a different culture, gastronomically speaking, and this varies, from super indigenous recipes in Oaxaca with mole to people whose diets every day are to eat McDonald's. I'm not trying to essentialize anything. Get close and share something with someone, eat something, and connect with them from that place. Put your phone away while you eat. Look the person in the eyes. Ask them what they like, what they don't like, and if they put pickles on the burger, why or why not. And we can't take these things for granted because again, deliciousness is being there in those little details, in those small things. That's where we see the beauty. And that's what we take for granted, especially when we're thinking about big change in our systems and our territories. It's like, yes, but this fry is also really good when you dip it in this sauce. And that is a bridge to connection. So I think I'll leave it there. So I don't start talking about more common practices, but these are things that I really recommend. Um, I was checking to see if there was a question, but no, I think it was just my own stomach making noises. But I mean, I learned so many things, right? Like I learned that we shouldn't put ketchup on new food. We should try what's offered. Well, just try it first. Try it first. I love the way in which you make these connections for us in terms of, food, in terms of what's political, systems change. And I also, the way in which you hold a power analysis when it comes to food and roots. You know where that food came from in the way that you say, this cuisine comes from this territory 400 years ago. Knowing those histories, I think, is also a part of having a good analysis when you're doing the work of social change, of systems change. And so I don't well, I want you to leave us with 3 ingredients that we can uh, sprinkle into our practice of systems change. And before you mentioned dignity, you mentioned deliciousness, and you mentioned territory as things that are difficult to translate. And so I'd like to know maybe what are 3 ingredients that we can use in the way that we, cook systemic change. Ugh, yummy. Hmm. I think that one ingredient that's really important, I think, is, something that we also talked about in a previous conversation that we had, um, is the question about what do I want to feed? What do I want to nourish? not, like nourishment is like a value as a fundamental element of your practice. Because often in discourse that I see, especially in the global north, I see a lot of like, I want to disassemble, I want to deconstruct, I want to destroy, tear down. And sometimes I need to see, okay, but what are you trying to feed or nourish with this? Because again, like you need both narratives and you need both questions. What are you putting in its place? What are you giving the world? What are you adding to this soup? So nourishment as an essential quality of things has to be there. And that question um, of what am I feeding? What do I want to feed here? Because that helps you separate yourself from the savior narrative, someone who like comes with a little bag full of solutions. You nourish something that's already there. The land already has everything it needs to survive, and all you have to do is set the conditions so that what is there can grow and prosper and flourish and evolve toward unimaginable forms. So, nourishment is such an important ingredient to me. Another ingredient that I think is really important is reciprocity, if I can call it that. Reciprocity has to do with how we leave this like culture of extraction from people, from landscapes, from everything, and get closer to the world and to others from a place that's generative and that recognizes that there's interdependence amongst us. And this isn't like some hippie philosophical thing. Like there are models, there is proof of this everywhere. It's not just like some spiritual vision of the world. It is like it's a true vision of the world. We depend on the flow of things. Some of these things are tangible and some are intangible, but how do you carry reciprocity into your systems change? You're going to carry a lot of things, right? Like they give you a grant, you get reputation, you get money, but what are you leaving behind? What is the value that you are leaving? What gifts are you bringing from day zero? Because it's not at the end saying, oh, well, I'm going to do this project and the impact of this will be. No. What gift are you giving today in this conversation, in this visit, in this journey? And how are you generating reciprocity with others? And how are you generating reciprocity with the people and the places and the landscape, which I think we forget often, especially those of us who work often in cities. Like this idea leaves us of creating reciprocity with the space, with the trees, with the soil, with the fruit, and the animals, large and small. Because that's like at the heart of this way of working toward justice, right? From a territorial perspective. So, what are you giving your territory? And I think the last ingredient is just enjoyment. Enjoyment. Not taking things so seriously that it makes you rigid or fearful or anxious about consequences. Knowing that, we're learning collectively how to manage complexity as we're seeing it today. It's completely unprecedented. And so you need to have enjoyment. You need to be able to be in environments in which you can laugh at yourself, where you can keep your sense of humor around everything that's happening, around the things that you do, the things that other people do. Because that also helps us live a little more lightly. And I think in my personal practice, enjoyment is always present all the time. I can't work if I'm not in this mood that allows me precisely to lighten up, to lighten the load, but also knowing that enjoyment is a door that connects us to other transcendental things in the world. It's not enjoyment as irresponsibility. It's enjoyment from the point of view of someone who is completely devoted to what they do, but who can laugh at themselves and the circumstances, and who can take a small break to eat a snack, to reconnect with what's important, to the root, to the body, to the world. Take a music break to clear your mind. Or even like doing all of this at once in your process, which maybe makes your processes a little more chaotic. And we're not all good at navigating that chaos, that makes everyone like enjoy things as we work. But it's something that we need more of, especially if we want to build this dignified life in which there's well being for people, for the non human world. Yes. I think that those three ingredients encompass a lot of other things and make quite the soup. Wow. I feel nourished. I feel fed, but I'm still hungry. I'm still hungry for more. I still have room for some dessert. So, and that's how I like to be. I like to leave little room for dessert. So, before we close, before we leave this space, I'd like to know, Ana Lucia, what are the forms in which, in what ways can we find you? Can we work with you? Can we support your work? Can we feed you, eat with you? Sorry. Lou, you can find me at my personal email and my institutional email. I'll put them in the chat. info@arare.org. We are in the process of developing our website so that we can publish a little bit more of our work. You can also find us on LinkedIn. If you search for Arare. And yeah, my personal email is here. I also would love to invite anyone who's here. We have at this moment um, a community of learning and teaching of systems change from the perspective of like the living world, and we'd love to have this community grow and be positioned as like a Latin American place for effecting change in our systems, in our life systems, through our connection to territory and land and what that requires from us. So anyone who would like to join that, you're more than welcome. Write us, we'll send you information. We'll send you all of the details for how that works. And I'm in Mexico City. If anybody is in Mexico City right now, we can go for coffee, we can eat some tacos, or take a walk. And yeah, I'd love to hear more from all of you. We're very actively now asking ourselves, how do we see this Latin American perspective of changing systems? What can we say from our experiences living, growing, working here? And also, how do we generate bridges that allow us to share the conclusions that we are reaching with people from other places in the world, especially with the global north, to see from how we can grow channels that feed different ways of relating and that allow us to position these discourses in different spaces that we know we all need for different reasons. So, if you have resources, ideas, thoughts, questions about all of this, please share them as well because I need all the nourishment to enrich in not just my practice, but uh, also the spaces with which I'm connecting on a personal and professional level. And I think that would be it. I think that would be it for me. Well, thank you, Ana Lucia. Um, I just want to give also a big shout of thank you to WEPA for grounding us in language justice and for making me practice my Spanish. Um, I also just want to give a shout out so, to our Court of Luminaries. Please be mindful, looking out for opportunities coming from the Illuminate Network. And thank you to all of you. Thank you for being here, for being present during this conversation, this international conversation about this sector of change and the connection between equity and the work of justice in changing systems. So thank you again, Ana Lucia, for joining us from Colombia, and for leaving us with so much deliciousness, flavor, inspiring us to delight in things. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Lu. Thank you, Marisela, Vero, Margot, and everyone who is here joining us today. It was a very delicious conversation. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Maybe with a big bowl of ajiaco or sancocho. We have to bring something. We have to bring a snack next time. Okay, I like that. Bye. See you later. Thanks, everyone.